Hi, this is Glenn Loury. This clip is taken from a conversation I recently posted at my Patreon page. The full episode will be available for free in a few days, but if you want to see it now and support the show, please go to patreon.com/Glenn Show. That's patreon.com/Glenn Show. Thanks.
Another thing that I want to ask you about is meritocracy, particularly in light of your recent discussion with Markovits, whose book I actually reviewed for The Nation. I'm a classic millennial, find the concept quite wanting today in light of recent developments. But I was wondering if at the time, rising to this position in MIT, how that shaped your worldview on meritocracy and basically the foundational question of democracy, which is like, who should make decisions and who should govern, and what was going on as you're maturing intellectually in the 1970s?
Meritocracy. And all these years blur together. I mean, this is a half century that we're talking about. Affirmative action was really not even fully developed as a kind of institutionalized practice when I started at MIT as a graduate student. And by the time you get to the turn of the 21st century, it's a dug-in, reflexive institutional reaction to the relative paucity of Black faces in various venues, Silicon Valley, Caltech, whatever it might be, venture capital, whatever. I was influenced by a lot of different things going on in the 70s. One of them was the radical economists. I took them seriously. I didn't follow them, but I took them seriously. Bose and Gintis had a book called Schooling in Capitalist America, which had a big influence on me. I read it carefully, and it did change somewhat the line of argument that I made in my dissertation. I didn't follow them, but I was influenced by them. And, this was an understanding of the fact that the institutions of education were socially situated and that they would, to some degree, be in the business of reproducing structures of hierarchy within the society by, in effect, teaching people their place so that working class kids would not be imbued with the same sense of agency and control over their fate and would be made well suited for their, worker bee futures, which the system had in store for them. I took that somewhat seriously. I mean, my ideas today about race and racism are very much different than I was much more conventional. I would have thought that, of course, I was going to be looked askance at as a Black person practicing in a field. There were very few Blacks. I might have had a bit of a chip on my shoulder about that. I can remember in my dissertation, I have a line where I'm dismissive of neoclassical economics as, I had introduced my own new idea. And I say, of course, neoclassical economists like the Chicago School, Gary Becker, Jacob Mincer, those people will not get this because they're dug in the wood and dug in. And recently, maybe 5 years ago, I was interviewed by somebody at the magazine for the Minneapolis Fed. Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank has a magazine called Regions, and they do profiles of economists. And I was the subject of a cover story for the magazine maybe 5 years ago. And this intrepid reporter, who was really very well informed, had dug out my dissertation, found this line where I was dismissive of neoclassical economics, threw it up in my face and asked me, well, Professor Loury, what did you mean when you gave the back of your hand to neoclassical? Of course, neoclassical economics won't understand whatever. And I had to confess that it was a pose. That I had to take a smack at neoclassical economics in order to feel good about myself as a Black person. I had not yet drunk the Kool-Aid. I had not completely, of course, my more radical African-American colleagues in grad school at that time thought for sure that I had drunk the Kool-Aid because I was always up there in the front of the class raising my hand trying to get the mathematical thing correct. And I was very seldom to be found at the study group that was reading Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon, a great man, but in 1973, I didn't have any time for Frantz Fanon. I was too busy trying to figure out what Kenneth Arrow was talking about. So they would have said, that I wasn't a particularly Black economist, but I was thinking to myself that you asked me about meritocracy, and what I'm saying is I came along at a time when I would have been very suspicious of the claim that all you have to do is be good enough and everything's going to be okay. On the other hand, I saw a lot of wheat getting separated from the chaff at MIT. I saw a lot of cream rising to the top, whatever your metaphor is. The difference between getting that paper into Econometrica and not getting that paper into Econometrica is not about whether or not the editor is your buddy. It's about whether or not the anonymous referees who have spent maybe a full day on your paper trying to digest what it is that you have done, and who are intimately familiar, not just with the literature in print, but with work that's ongoing in the various labs and research centers around the world, think that your idea adds value to the corpus of what it is that's known about the critical subject. Now, if that's not meritocracy, I don't know what is. These are not popularity contests. These are not fad and fashion, although there is that phenomenon from time to time. Certain modes of inquiry or sets of questions will be more or less fashionable than others, and there'll be a kind of flocking of people at the journals to publishing papers along those lines. But it's mainly about, I thought then and I think now, it's mainly about how good are you at this craft, at this rarefied, intellectually challenging, difficult, subtle craft of formal analysis of social interaction, game theory, information economics. It's about that. And if you're good at it, the cream will rise to the top. If you're able to do it, the wheat will be separated from the chaff. And if you're not getting your paper in the journal, well, it's not because you're Black. It's because you haven't written the paper that people, and who else will you turn to except your peers, think adds sufficient value to the corpus of what's known and being asked about the questions at issue. So I became a believer in the power of mastery, of the mastery of your craft. And I guess that makes me a meritocratic, and if you saw my conversation, maybe a believer in meritocracy, and if you saw my conversation with Daniel Markovits, I was pushing back constantly with him about, you're telling me it doesn't matter what doctor performs open heart surgery on me. It doesn't matter what school that he or she went to and how many fellowships that they hold and what their peers think about their professional acumen. You're telling me I want my case, the case where my company rises or falls based on this lawsuit, to be handled by, it doesn't matter who, it doesn't matter whether they were trained at Harvard or at the Yale Law School or whatever, I mean, come on, I know it. I know that does matter. I know society has an interest in cultivating this kind of excellence. And I know that a recognition of that excellence within the structures of reward is essential to creating the incentives that brings it forward to maximal effect. Not that Daniel Markovits doesn't have a lot of really interesting things to say in that book. I admire him and the book, but I became a believer in meritocracy. And people are going to say, well, yeah, because you're up there in the front of the class answering the questions. Of course you believe in meritocracy. Suppose somebody didn't have your particular gift at that particular activity. And my answer would be they probably ought to find something else to do.